Oh, Boise, Boise, Boise's. Oh, Boise's. I am just so excited. I'm just so excited to do a video nobody's gonna watch. A video nobody's gonna watch. If you're sitting there and you're wondering why so many YouTube content creators are talking about America's second civil war, that's because that's what YouTube promotes. YouTube promotes America's second civil war. They don't promote parsing XML files. I don't know. I've got 140,000 subscribers and doing videos talking about parsing XML files and I got like 400 views. 400 views. Wow. Did you think my subscriber to viewer ratio was bad before? That's back when I was talking about subjects YouTube gave a damn about. Now that I'm talking about parsing XML files, I might as well be talking to myself. I might as well just sit there and talk to a mirror for as many people are actually going to watch this thing. But anyways, that's the real world. That's the real world of being a content creator. Just remember, you go out there and you try to actually teach people something, nobody cares. You talk about America's second civil war. People are like, oh, oh my golly. Anyways, I just can't do it anymore. I just don't have the. I don't have the whatever. I sit there. That's the whole thing. Like, I feel like years ago, like there are these periods. There are these periods in my YouTube career where I sit there and I watch what the cool kids are doing, and then I realize I can't do that. Again, I talk about that like 6 or 7 years ago. I sat there and I watched people like Jenna Marbles, right? And I saw what they were doing, and I just have no idea what they're doing. I don't get it. I don't really get why it's interesting. I don't really get how they do it. I don't really get any of it, right? So like 6 or 7 years ago, I was looking at people like Jenna Marbles, and I was like, oh, well, it's not for me. Then a few years ago, like 2016, 2017, I was looking at the tech YouTube content creators all talking about bezels and RGB lighting, and I realized I couldn't do it. And that's where I come with to today. Today in 2020. I sit there and I see the 10 pools of the world. And I see all these people. They're getting so many views. They're getting so many views for doing social commentary. But I just don't really want to. I just don't really want. It's like, here's the thing. Here's the thing. Build a better world. I'm gonna tell you a secret. I'm gonna tell you a secret right here and right now. The people that build the future get to decide what the future looks like. Oh, it's a secret. Shh. When you're the one building Schnizzle, you get to decide what Schnizzle looks like. But anyways, people don't want to build Schnizzle. People don't want to build Schnizzle. They want to throw statues in the harbor. I just anyway, so I guess the topic we're talking about today, this is what I've been working with today. So what I've been playing around with today is I am now parsing the NMAP XML file into MySQL. So NMAP, if you do not know, is very cool. You should know NMAP. NMAP is a command line network scanning utility. So it finds IP addresses on the network, it finds open ports on the network, gives you the MAC address, gives you the vendor based off of the MAC address, gives you some other information. So it's a command line utility. One of the things with it is it can output to text files. So it can output to a standard text file. It can output to what's called a greppable text file. So this is kind of like the old way, the deprecated way of parsing. It can output to an XML file. It can also export out to like some script kiddie file. Anyways, so what I'm doing is I'm scanning the network and then I'm outputting to the XML file. But one of the big things is, all right, now you have an XML file. Woo, right? And if you're not really sure what an XML file looks like, what an XML file looks like is this. So this is my NMAP little test XML I'm running everything off of. And so basically this is what the XML file looks like. So it gives you a lot of information. So here's the IP address for this particular computer. Here's the MAC address for that particular computer. Here's the vendor for this particular computer. Here are the open ports for this particular computer. Right? It actually gives you a whole bunch of information. But as you can see, it gives you all of this information in something that looks like this. So basically the idea with parsing is we go through, we use a script to read and pull out the information that we actually care about in the text file. And then after that, basically what we're doing is we're turning values into variable values, or we're turning information into variable values. So now we have a variable called IP, and now we're able to assign that variable the IP address that we're able to pull out of the XML file. So we pull out this IP address, and so now we have a value for a variable. We have the value for the variable for the MAC address, so on and so forth. And so previously, what I showed you, like in the last video, was now that I had those values, I could simply print them out onto a screen. So if nothing else, you can print them out onto a screen. You can make a little bit better if-else statements, maybe, like if port 80 is open, or if port is 80, make it red, that type of thing. So that's what I showed you before. So that's a little more useful. It's a little more useful than just a standard NMAP export. But what becomes really interesting, becomes really useful, is if you can take those values and then you can actually input them into a database. Because once you input them into a database, then you can actually store them in an easily accessible fashion, and then you can test against the stuff in the database. So basically you could go through and you'd say, count all the computers we have from Dell. Show me all the computers that have port 80 open. If port 80 is open on any computers other than blah, send me an alert, an email or an SMS notification, right? Once you can take the variable values and you can dump those values into a database, into fields in a database, then you can start to do some interesting things. And so that's what I did today. So this right here is now the report that I'm having. So basically, I have the database, and all of the information gets dumped into the database. And then what I'm doing right now is I'm simply actually just printing out the reports basically into a table. So what's happening here is I did a scan, or basically I did an import at 11:11 this morning, and these were all the devices. These were all the devices that were in that particular import, and so basically it can now show me this. So 192.168.1.1 has that particular MAC address. It is that particular vendor. Has port 53, port 80, and port 5000 open, and this over here is a little timestamp. And so what I'm using this timestamp for is basically to group. So you can notice this. So scan at 11:11, basically when the import was done. So all of these were detected at that particular import time. At 11:19, all of these were detected at that particular import time, and at whatever, that's the wrong time. But anyways, at that particular time, these were all the devices that were at that particular time. And again, so you can start to see, like, as computers get turned on, computers get turned off. And so you can do interesting, like, you can do weird reports. You can do weird reports. So, like, if people turn their computers off, you can see, like, when are computers actually being used on the network? When is the highest, like, load on the network or anything like that? Is maybe you can see, okay, at 9 o'clock in the morning, we are now detecting 50 computers, and at, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're detecting 15 computers, or something like that. So anyways, this is kind of interesting. So basically, this report is being 100% pulled out of the MySQL database. So the information goes into the MySQL database, and then this gets pulled out. If we go over and we actually take a look at the server that I'm using, so this is the MySQL database that we have right here. And let me scroll this up a little bit so we can see this is MySQL, and basically these are the entries here. So we have an ID here, a log ID here, we have the IP address here, we have the MAC address here, we have the vendor here, we have the ports that are open here, and then of course we have the time code to deal with over here. And so basically what we're then doing is with PHP, I'm able to pull out this information and then write it into a report. Now if we go over and we actually take a look The code that I wrote to do this, I think it's kind of interesting here. So let's go here, use VS Code. Ooh, look at me. Look at me using a real code editor, all right? So for this particular project, I actually have two scripts. So I have that parse2 script I was dealing with before, and then the NMAP report script. So this script basically looks like the script we were dealing with before in the last video. I also did a class based off of this script, literally got uploaded today. So this script here looks a lot like the last thing that we dealt with, but then I added on the database components. And that's one thing to be thinking about with code. Remember, code, you can build onto it. So basically, it's kind of one of those things, especially when you're new, is you sit there and you're like, okay, the first thing I have to do is figure out how to actually get the information out of the text file. And so you can write your script to get the information out of the text file. And then once you've done that, then you can tweak the code a little bit to turn that information you got out of the text file into variable values. And then once you figured out how to do that, you can just print that to a browser, and then you can go back and then figure out how to be able to dump that into like a MySQL database. That's one big thing, like with a lot of new people. They try to start too big. They try to start with a big project, right? And so they get very confused. So if you start with this huge idea of what you want to create, and then you're trying to build that, a lot of times there's so much that goes into it, you'll get very confused. Whereas if you just start with the building blocks. Okay, first, I just want to be able to parse the text file. Then now that I know how to parse the text file, now I want to be able to turn those values into that information into variable values. Then once I know how to do that, then I want to dump that into a database. Then once I know to do that, then I want to start creating the scripts to actually give me useful reports. And then once I've done that, now I want to create notification systems for one of those problems. And now that I've done that, now I want to create customizable dashboards so people can start, whatever, create a user account system and all that kind of stuff, right? So you start small and then grow. But anyways, so this is the old code. What we have here, so basically this is the file, so you understand what the script does. So this is the file. So I had this nmap test.xml file. So this is basically just I copied an XML file that I created from nmap, and I'm just using that for the tests. And so that's going to be the file. So we have a file, and that's going to be that file. Then here we have the information for the database, right? So I have the server name. So this is using a MySQL database. So local host. I have a username of nmap user. So nmap user is given full permission to nmap.log. So there's an nmap database on the server and a log table within that database. So he has the account to be able to deal with that log table. We have a password, super secret password of 123456, and we have a database of nmap. So we have this connection here. So this is a standard MySQL connection that we've used for a lot of projects. We have the if there's a connection error, tell me that it failed, just to make sure that there isn't a connection error. And then here, I've created all of these little variables because I'm actually going to use these variables all the way at the end. So you'll notice most of this here looks a lot like what I did the other day, but then all the way down at the end here, this is where we actually add those values into the database. And so basically I just have these variables here so you know what variables that you're going to be dealing with. So we're going to have an IP address, we're going to have a MAC address, we're going to have a vendor name, we're going to have a host name, and then we have a whole bunch of port things. So basically we have a port number. So when it scans through and it finds a port, right? So basically when we're over here and it finds a port. So initially, we're going to have to turn that single number into a variable. So that single number is going to get turned into a variable. And then what we're going to do is we're going to shove that number into a key in the array. So basically, we're going to add it to an array. So we're just going to keep adding, right? Because that's the thing, is like when we look at this, some of these computers only have one port being open, and some of these computers have a lot of ports being open. So in order to very easily be able to capture numerous ports, I'm going to have an array. And so basically what's going to happen is we're going to grab individual port numbers, and then for each host, we're just going to keep dumping those numbers into an array until it completes itself. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do an implode. So this is kind of cool, right? So we take a string, then we dump everything into an array, and then we use implode, and implode will then turn that array back into a string. And so then once it's back into a string, I can just dump in whatever that string is. So this is the string that was created from this array, this was a string that was created from this array, this was a string that was created from this array, so on and so forth. So that's kind of interesting. And then we have a little timestamp here, because you know me, I just love my timestamps. Then we're going to come here, and first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get the IP address, like I showed you in the previous video. So basically, we're going to go through, and when we're taking a look at this XML file, all right, so we're taking a look at this XML file. Basically, we're going line by line by line by line, and we're using something called string position. The string position function basically allows you to ask if something is in a line. So what we're going to say is we're going to use string position, and if address type, ADDR type equals IPv4, so if that equals true, then we're going to deal with that particular line. If it doesn't, we're not going to deal with that particular line. We're going to keep going. Then we're going to go for preg match. So basically, this is basically pattern match. And with this, what we're going to do is we're going to try to rip out a bit of that line. So with the preg match here, if we scroll and we take a look for something that has IPv4 in it, give me, okay, so there we go. So we have this IPv4, and so basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy out, this out. Basically, this is what I'm going to do. I'm essentially going to copy that out. So I'm going to basically copy that out, and that is going to be a variable value called results. So basically, we're going to take, the line. We're going to take the line. We're going to copy all of this. And so we have this dot star in here. So basically, ADDR equals, double quotation mark, dot star, so wildcard, and then ADDR type. So basically, it's going to grab everything, including the IP address. It's going to assign that value to results. Results is actually an array. So results will be an array. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this thing called implode. The implode function will basically turn that array into a string. We will assign that to IP. We will then use left trim to basically cut this off the left side of IP. We will use R trim to cut this off the right side of IP. And then we will simply be left with IP address, right? And so basically, if you go through, most of this is the same. For the vendor, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to be looking for ADDR type equals MAC. So again, if we come here and we're looking for the MAC address and the vendor, so see how the vendor is here. So I'm looking for a line that has ADDR equals MAC. If it has that, then I'm going to go through, I'm going to rip out the information, like I say, vendor with a wildcard, that goes to results. Results is going to get imploded. The value is going to be sent over to vendor. So vendor will now be a string. We will left trim off a little bit. We will right trim off a little bit, and then we'll print out vendor. MAC address, the same type of thing. Going to go through, look for that ADDR type equals MAC. If so, we're then going to grab the MAC address. That's going to be sent to an array. That array we need to turn into a string. We use implode to turn it into a string. That will now be $MAC. We left trim a little bit off, we right trim a little bit off, and then we have a MAC address. Same thing for host name. We're going to go through. Type PTR is something that is in the lines that have a host name in it. So there aren't very many host names that this thing can see. Where's a host name at? Yeah, so here's a host name. So basically, host name line has type PTR. So that's what we're going to look for. So if there's type PTR in the line, then we're going to go through. We're going to rip out some information. That information is going to be sent over to results. Results, of course, is an array. So we need to use implode in order to turn that array into a string, which will now be host name. We trim a little bit off the left. We trim a little bit off the right. We trim a little bit more off the right. Again, our trim is a little quirky in this particular thing. For some reason, if I try to trim everything off all at once, it doesn't work. So I trim off space type first, and then I trim off double quotation mark, and then I get the host name. So that's all the pretty standard stuff here. And if we go over, let me see, to the printout, just to kind of show you what this looks like. Oops, that's the wrong thing. This looks like, so this is the parse script, and so this is where we have the IP address, then we see the IP address. We have the vendor, we see Apple. We have the MAC address, we see 80 colon blah blah blah, and then we're going to go down to the ports. So the ports is what kind of gets a little bit interesting here for a lot of different reasons, because again, it's multiple different values for one host. So everything else here is one value per host. You get one IP address for the host, you get one MAC address for the host, you get one vendor for the host, right? Ports are the only thing where you're actually going to have multiple values per host, and so that's why you need to use something like an array. And so what we're going to go through here is we're going to say if string position has a port ID in it, Then what we're going to do is we're going to do that pattern match, preg match. We're going to look for port ID equals with the wildcard in here with state. That will go to results. Results is an array. We use implode in order to turn that array into a string. And so that string is now port. We're going to trim a little bit off the left. We're going to trim a little bit off the right. And then we're going to print out port and what the port number is. So again, if we come here and we take a look at it, that's what we get here. So basically port equals 5009, port equals 10,000, port equals 5,000, port equals 7,000, port equals 7,100, so on and so forth. But here's going to be the curious thing. How do we dump that into a database? How can we keep all of these things together and dump it into a database? So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to do array underscore push, and we're going to put the value for port into something called port array. So we created this array up here called port array. So every time we get a new port value, we are going to shove that value into port array. So we look up here at the other variable values, right? If we look up here, they all are single ones that get assigned. So here we now have a value for IP address. Here we now have a value for vendor. Here we now have a value for MAC address. Here we now have a value for host name. But then here, again, we're going to have multiple port numbers. So the question is, how do we keep them all together? So the way we keep them all together is by putting them into an array. So we're going to use the function called array underscore push. We're going to say put the value into port array, and the value is this. So that is going to get dumped into the port. And then we come down here and we actually get into the new database stuff. So this is kind of a curious thing. So the question then becomes is basically how do we trigger the putting all the information into the database? So that's one thing you have to be thinking about in the programming world is basically how are we going to containerize, or how are we going to basically keep all of this information together, right? So if I get an IP address and then I dump the IP address directly into the database, and then I dump the MAC address directly into the database, and then I dump the host name and the vendor and all that directly into the database, you start getting the problem of how do you keep all of these different values together as one host, basically as one coherent identity. So what I'm doing is I'm collecting all that information. So IP now has a value, MAC now has a value, vendor now has a value, port is now a full array full of values, right? And so what I'm having is all of these values are now assigned to those variables. And so what I'm now going to do is I'm going to do an if statement for the string position and basically /host, right? So if we go over and we took a look at the XML, what we're going to notice is that the host is all within these tags, right? So we can see this. So again, this is one thing to be looking at with XML. One of the nice parts with XML is you're using tags to kind of format everything. And so basically host starts here, host ends here. So I know this is the end of the host information, so there will be no further information about this particular host past this particular tag. So when I see this tag, that is when I want to bring all these variables together so that I can dump them into the database. And so that's basically what I'm looking for here, string position. So basically when I see /host with the little arrowy thingy, and when that equals true, I then want to turn the value for the variable timestamp. I'm simply using the time variable, the time function here. And then I'm using port list. So basically, port list is going to equal that port array. So that big array that I've created, all the ports that have been gathered have been dumped into an array. I'm going to use implode. And then basically what I'm going to say as a separator is I want a comma space. I want a comma space. So when I turn these all these array values into one string, I want to say what the value is, comma, space, the value, comma, space, the value, comma, space, the value, comma, space, the value. And so then I will have a string. Once I have a string, that's very easy to put into a database. And then here, I'm just going to have this ugly looking thing, right? And let me do full size here. So at this point, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say what my SQL statement is. So $SQL. So what the SQL statement is insert into the log table. So the log table within the NMAP database, IP, MAC, vendor, hostname, ports, and timestamp. And I want the values to be, and do make sure you put all this within single quotation marks. So I'm going to do $IP, $MAC, $vendor, $hostname, $port list, $timestamp, and then close it all out. So this nasty long thing. So it's going to be one single SQL statement. I'm going to dump this all into a single record. If the connection query SQL equals true, then I'm going to echo out data added, IP, MAC, vendor, hostname, port list, timestamp, so on and so forth. Else, we're going to put out an error. So basically what that's going to look like when I'm looking at the normal page here, that's where I have this at the bottom. So this is just kind of a troubleshooting routine for me for when this goes through. It parses the information. I can then see, okay, data added. This is the IP address that was added. This is the MAC address that was added. This is the vendor that was added. These are the ports that were added. And this is the timestamp. So that's simply printing that out onto the screen. Then what I'm going to do, because then I need to clean everything up, is basically this is where I clean all the variable values up. Because remember, once you assign a value to a variable, that value stays there until you clean it up one way or the other. So one of the problems you can run into with a script like this is, as I've talked about before, not every computer returns a host name. So only a couple of computers on my network return host names. So, right? If basically one computer says its host name is Ubuntu, and then I leave it, I don't do anything with it, then the next host that I scan through, it will keep that Ubuntu host name, and then the next computer, when it goes in the database, will be called Ubuntu. And the next computer will be called Ubuntu, and the next computer will be called Ubuntu, until there's actually a value to modify that to whatever gateway or whatever else, and then it'll get modified. Again, one of the big problems too is like with arrays. With arrays, if you don't clear out the array, you may just keep adding to it, right? You only want to add for the host, so port 80, port 22, port 25, whatever. But what happens if you don't clean out the array somehow? Then when you scan the first host, you have port 80 and port 443. And then when you scan the next host, that has port 25 and port 22. So now you have 22, 25, 80, and 443. And then it goes to the next host, and then it has 22, 25, 80, 443, and 10,000. And all of a sudden, you can start getting these massive lists. So we need to clean that information out. We need to clean those variables out. So here, basically, once this has all been added to the database, then IP is going to be basically blanked out, MAC is going to get blanked out, vendor is going to get blanked out, host name is going to get blanked out, and then what we're going to do here is we're going to do something called unset port array. So basically what unset does is it essentially destroys the array entirely, and then we're going to simply recreate port array again as an array. So this is basically going to destroy the array, and then we're recreating the array. And then for port list, again, remember, port list is the string that gets created from the implode of the array. Then we're going to set that, again, to being blank too. Then we're going to close this out, then we're going to close this out, and then we're going to have the connection to the database closed down here. You do have to have this all the way down here. If you screw up when you close the connection, the script might not work for you. So that's basically what's going on there, and that's what then puts all the values into the database. And you have this nice thing here. Then if you want to see how the report how we get to the report, so when we take a look at the report, oh, the report is this, right? So this is the report. So if I refresh this, I can see, okay, so these are the different times the information has basically been imported into the database, and basically I'm printing out the IP address, the MAC address, the vendor, the port number, and the timestamp. So how we get that accomplished is we go over to NMAP report. Basically, this is just simply printing out, relatively simple, 36 lines from the database. So we open up the PHP. We're connecting to the database. So localhost, NMAP user, 1234556, database of NMAP. We're going to have a connection, server name, username, password, DB. We're going to have, if there's a connection error, tell us what the connection error is. Then what we're going to be doing here is we're going to create a SQL statement. Is a SQL equals select all from log. So log is the table. Result is going to equal connection query. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to turn it's going to turn the SQL statement into something that we can use, that basically that we can step through. We can do a while loop. Then we're going to have a split trigger here. So this split trigger just so you understand what this is basically this is using a timestamp in order to create these splits. So again, you see how all of these records have the same timestamp and all these records have the same timestamp? We're able to do that using that split trigger variable. So then we're going to come down here. We're going to simply echo out H1 NMAP scan report. Then we're going to say if result number of rows is greater than 0. So this is result. So basically, again, we have a SQL statement here. We're going to actually do the query off of the SQL statement. The value of that is going to go to result. So we're going to say if the result has, more than 0 rows, the first thing that we're going to do is echo out a table. So again, why this looks all nice and pretty and evenly spaced is because this is a table. Again, something to be thinking about is how you're going to format the information. So then what we're going to say is while basically $row. So as we're going through the row, result fetch association. So basically while it's fetching the association. Here, what we're going to be doing here is basically we're going to be saying if the row timestamp does not equal split trigger, echo scan at date. So basically what's happening here is when you're going through these records, oh, so much information. So when you're going through these records and you're taking a look at the timestamp here, right, you're going to be scanning through. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the value of the trigger to what this is. And then when the trigger then no longer equals what the timestamp is, that's when it's actually going to print out that little separator. If that makes any sense right there. Oh, it gets a little confusing trying to explain all this. So basically, what we're going to say here is if row timestamp does not equal split trigger, we're going to simply echo out, we're going to print out scan at and what the date is. So this is using the date function. So we're using the timestamp. We're using row timestamp. And then we're going to format that using the date function. And so that'll give us our nice, this is the time and this is the date that it was done. And then we're going to have split trigger equal basically what the timestamp is. Then we're simply going to go down here. If it does equal, if timestamp does equal split trigger, it's simply going to go down here and it's going to echo each row. So basically it's going to do a table row, then it's going to do a table field. It's going to say row for the IP address. It's going to print that out. Then it's going to go row for the MAC address. It's going to print that out. Row vendor, it's going to print that out. Row ports, it's going to print that out. And then row timestamp, it's going to print that out. And then it's going to close off the row. It's going to continue to do that until it finishes the while loop. And then it will close off the entire table. And so that's where, if we go, we can take a look. And so this is all just one table. And essentially what's happening here is it's printing out this information, right? So it's printing, and as long as the timestamp is the same. So basically, that trigger value equals the timestamp, and as long as the trigger value and the timestamp are the same, it keeps going along. And then as soon as the time goes to the next time, then that's when it's no longer equal. So that's why it prints out this is when it was scanned, and then it resets itself to the new timestamp until the trigger value no longer equals the time because it's gone to the new time. Then that gets printed out, so on and so forth. And so that's basically what we're looking here. Pretty simple little script. Pretty simple little code. I guess I'll put all this onto EliTheComputerGuy.com under our notes section. So if you don't know about Eli, with EliTheComputerGuy.com, we actually have project notes. So I will put this under the project notes. So maybe you can take a look at this a little bit better, understand it a little bit better. But that's basically what's going on. If we go over, we take a look at the table, just so you understand how the table looks. So we're at MySQL. So if we do describe log, so log is a table. We can go here and basically, I'm just using text as the data type. I know for the real programmers out there, you should not just use text as a data type, but it makes it easier, especially when I'm just screwing around and prototyping. So here I have a field. So I have the IP, the MAC, the vendor, the host name, the ports, and the timestamp field, along with a log ID. So log ID is an integer, it's a primary key, and it's auto-incremented. Everything else here, these are simply text data types. with, whatever. Just dump whatever the hell you want to dump into. And then that's what gets you this up here. And again, like I say, I gave that NMAP _ user. I gave that user all privileges other than grant. Can't create other users to the log table. So it's able to input crap and output crap and so on and so forth. So anyways, I think this is a pretty cool thing. So again, now we're able to parse an XML file, dump that information into a database, and then once it's in a database, then we're able to pull that information out. And then, like I say, that's when you can start doing some very interesting things. I would argue for most things in the tech world, like everybody has this idea in the tech world that, technology is so sophisticated and so amazing. What I would argue, most of the stuff that's used in the IT world really is basically pulling information from inputs, dumping it somewhere, and then pulling information back out again. Like so much of the stuff we deal with, again, whether it's Twitter or whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's accounting software like QuickBooks, so much of the software we use today are basically just inputs and outputs with a database backend. And so if you can start building this type of stuff, again, like I say, you can start doing some really interesting things. So again, imagine with this, having a script go through, and whenever a new device is found on the network, it simply sends you an email notification, if you're the administrator, to say, hey, we have a brand new device on the network that we've never seen before. And so again, if you're a system administrator and you're kicking back, you're like, okay, let me figure out why this device is on the network. Or again, if you go through and you're scanning for ports, so like every day or every hour, you have NMAP scan, and then once in a while, it pulls up and it shows you that for some reason somebody turned on port 80 on one of their client computers, and so you can go out there, you can try to figure out why the hell port 80 is turned on, or again, trying to figure out what your users are doing on the network. If there's some kind of like file, Napster, whatever the Napster is of today. You know what I'm saying? Like again, whatever Napster, whatever file sharing software there is, you go out there, you scan the network. You see that particular port is open on one of your client computers, and then you go and you can tap the person on the shoulder and go, why do you have whatever the equivalent of Napster is on your computer today? Stop, right? And start to do some really, really interesting stuff based off of this. So I'm going to clean up this code. This code needs to be cleaned. It needs to be cleaned up. So I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to polish it up, and then I'm actually going to create a class on this. But I figure this is what I'll do. This is what I'll do with the Daily Blob for a little while. Is I'll show you the little projects that I'm doing. I'll explain to you the mentality of what I'm doing. I'll show you the ugliness of what I'm doing. And then go from there. Because I just can't deal with social commentary right now. In Baltimore, we've had 31 murders. 31 murders in the last month. And you know what they did yesterday? I think it was yesterday. They tore down the Columbus statue. Because Christopher Columbus was the one that got those 31 people shot over the past month. And there's like 13 people shot. There were like 13 people shot over the weekend. And what I don't understand, like what just blows my mind, and then people are like, why are police officers scared? Do you realize that? In Baltimore City, 13 people were shot over the weekend. I don't know who, say their names. I don't know. Newspapers don't even bother to say what their names are. Who cares? A white cop didn't kill them. If a white cop shot them, we would definitely know who the hell their names is. But, They didn't get shot the right way. There's a proper way to get shot in the modern world, and they didn't get shot in the modern world. And that's the thing. That's why it just blows my mind. It just blows my mind. Everybody's like, 13 people shot. 13 people shot. And then the solution is to defund the police and knock down the Columbus statue in front of Little Italy. The Columbus statue was actually in front of Little Italy. It was put up in like 1984. Because Italians, there's an Italian pride thing. The Italian pride thing, right? He's like a mascot to be proud of. So the Italians put him up in like 1984 to be proud of their Italian heritage. But, so he got knocked off and he got thrown to the port. And apparently the next mayor, again, is really into defunding the police and shutting all kinds of stuff down. And I was like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. 31 people shot. 31 people murdered in the past month. 13 people shot over the weekend. It was all Christopher Columbus's statue's fault. Now that that statue has fallen, more people get shot. That's where I just don't understand this modern world. That's where I'm like, how is this? So okay, so now you have an insane murder rate and no statues. And no statues. So now the murder rate is as bad as it's ever been, and you have ugly ass places that used to have statues. How does this bring jobs? How does this bring jobs? I don't understand. Am I supposed to be sitting out here in the suburbs and go, yeah, I thought about having my computer business in Baltimore City, but every time I saw that Columbus statue, I said no, I will not put my business in a city with a Columbus statue. But now that they destroyed that Columbus statue, now I am going to invest hundreds of thousands of my own dollars into the city, because that's a city that knows what to do with a Columbus statue. I don't know. I just don't. Everybody tells me I don't understand. Everybody tells me I don't understand. You're like, it's like, you're right. You're right. I don't. So anyway, we're just gonna sit here. We're gonna talk about ports. We're gonna talk about parsing. You go from there, and nobody will watch. Because nobody actually cares. Nobody actually cares, which is the hilarious part, which is the funny part. Because that's like, again, if people aren't trained for jobs, even if jobs come, how are they going to get them? Hey, look, we brought this business to the city that's willing to hire people. But nobody in the area actually has the job skills to do the jobs that they're offering. How's that gonna work? But anyways, so that's my frustration. If you ever see me why I get so frustrated, it's because one, like I say, I'm not really sure how Columbus statue getting knocked over. Not sure what that does for the 31 people that were murdered. Again, I don't know any of their names. Say their names. I have no idea the names of anybody murdered in Baltimore City over the past month, or the past 6 months, or the past year. The 300 plus that were murdered last year, not a clue. I'll say Bob. I'm sure out of 300, one of them was named with Bob. I don't know, right? But anyways, they're knocking it down. So anyways, but that's a funny thing. That's, it's like, oh. But then I go, and I'm trying to teach technology. Nobody watches that either. I don't know. So anyhow, the frustrations. People want to scream. People want to yell. That's what they really want to do. Somebody needs to fix this problem. Somebody needs to improve the education system. Somebody needs to improve the healthcare system. Somebody needs... Sounds like you know what the problem is. Sounds like you know what the problem is. So when are you going to try to fix that? What do you mean? I knocked down a statue. Yeah. It's that whole... Anywho. So I'm going to sit here. I'm going to try to teach you folks some technology. Show you again, like the back end. Again, I think it's kind of interesting now that I can get to these points of like coding and showing you some of the more of this interesting stuff. And again, like with triggers and all that kind of thing. Because again, we can do a lot of curious things. There's a lot of like management software we can play with. There's a lot of command line utilities in Linux. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. So I'm going to play. I'm going to do the videos. And the three of you that are watching can learn a little bit, I suppose. So anyways, I'm just babbling at this point. I am just babbling about Columbus statues and 31 murders. Say their names. I don't know. I don't think the newspaper bothered to say what their names were. Didn't you just find that odd? I just find that odd. Because again, I go to Frederick. I go to this place called Frederick. So Frederick, beautiful city. I would love to move to Frederick, maybe. Frederick is the kind of town I want to move to. My wife and I will probably move to. We're probably gonna do it in like Florida, but that kind of town. But anyways, so I go to Frederick, and they have all these signs up. They have all these signs, Black Lives Matter. All right. But like one of the things they have on the signs is say their name. So like the 4 people that have been murdered, George Floyd, Albright. Anyways, say their name, right? But it's 4 names. It's 4 names. But there's like you got 31 people murdered just in Baltimore City. They probably don't look like me. I'll put a $5 bet on the table. The people that got murdered don't look like me. No idea. No idea. Newspapers don't even bother to say what their names are. Again, I don't know. I think, what was it? Chicago. Chicago just had like another 50 people shot. 50. Atlanta, an 8-year-old girl was fucking shot in the head right beside where that one person was shot by the police. So you know how everybody's protesting and screaming and yelling and just having a fit over the guy who was shot by police? Yeah, an 8-year-old girl was shot in the head like 2 blocks away. You know. But it wasn't a white police officer. Ah! So, I don't know. So, I will leave. I will leave before I say something very impolitic. Impolitic. See you folks in the next video. And again, do make sure to keep a look at EliTheComputerGuy.com for the latest videos. Again, this parse NMAP, so Linux projects, parse NMAP XML output with PHP. So this is where I turn the XML output into values for variables and simply printed that on the screen. So that's where that code is. And then, like I say, when I clean up this code a little bit, I will be doing a class either today or tomorrow to explain how this works, and then that will be there, and so on and so forth. Do remember, if you like what I do, you might want to donate, or you might want to join. I'm just saying you can. If you want people to get, STEM education, I was saying you can pay. You can pay if you want. Can't throw a couple of dollars in. Anyways, see you folks later.